Welcome. I am delighted to be hosting this panel today on a section of audience that is often overlooked. Yes, I'm talking about women and Gen Z. And today we're going to talk about their habits, needs, outlook of the future of mobility, especially when it comes to EV and hybrids. And to talk about that, I have with me today 3 leaders in their field. Let's start with the introductions.
Thank you, Rishi. Hi, everyone. My name's Sophie Nathan King. I'm a strategist at Discover AI, and I tend to look at future-facing trends for consumers within the space of tech, beauty, and fashion. And I also have a history of working on campaign material for cars, specifically for Lightyear and Neo and Rivian. And ahead of this panel, I conducted a research piece on social media conversations for Gen Z with respect to hybrid cars and the future of mobility.
Hi everyone, my name is Carla Jakeman. I am the Director of Grant Funding for TRL, also the Employee Director and the Head of Automation and Transport. And TRL have been around, Transport Research Laboratory, they've been around for over 90 years. We invented the zebra crossing is our claim to fame. I personally haven't been around for 90 years, but I have been around for about 25 years in this industry.
And I'm Hannah Marcus. I'm an independent consultant and cultural strategist, and my work really centres on the overlap between culture and technology and looking at the way in which understanding cultural trends and different needs can impact our understanding of different sectors. So I've been looking at the way that if we look at women's needs across both mobility but also adjacent sectors from healthcare to gaming, what we can understand about the forces that operate on them and the decisions they make and the things that they need.
Thank you all for being here. We have a lot to get through. So let's start with understanding how this audience perceives the role of hybrid in mobility. We have a film to get through. We will talk about a series of questions on their mobility habits, their priorities, their hopes and thoughts for the future. Let's start with film 1.
I travel by car every day, I normally work from home, so not driving to work, but normally to the gym, out to see friends.
I'd only travel by car on the weekend.
I usually travel by car every day out of the week, 3 days out of the week to go to school, and then 4 to go to work.
I drive my car every day to work, to friends get-togethers, for errands.
I travel by car every day to work, taking my kids to school, and whenever I need to go to the grocery store.
I have a shared car with my mum because we have currently 4 cars and we can work with 4 cars at home, so I don't need my own car.
I don't currently own a car, and I do utilize a lot of rideshare services and public transit.
I do own the car, but we share the car with my husband. So sometimes if I really need a car urgently, yes, I will catch an Uber or go on Go-Get.
I own my car, it was given to me, and I don't ever really use rideshare services.
I own my own car. I only use rideshare services if I am going to be going out, like for a drink usually, or if I'm carpooling with friends.
I think that gave some good grounding to our discussion, especially on the car habits of Gen Z and women. Really keen to get your thoughts on it, especially you, Sophie, since you've been instrumental in getting this research done. Do you want to start?
Yeah, of course. I think it's really clear that for Gen Z specifically, mobility is coming from this need for freedom, independence, having a really flexible lifestyle, for example. You know, older women are needing it for the sake of their routine with family and looking after their kids and dropping them off. But specifically for Gen Z, there's this real sort of desire to break free from the threshold of your parents that you've been in for such a long period of time. It's also key to note that these conversations are coming from USA and Australia, and for them, the driving limit is much younger. So it's kind of like a rite of passage for people to enter into this new phase of life and living, and you know, getting your first new car and entering this whole new kind of routine and sense of independency.
I don't know if it would be that different in the UK, though, to be honest. I think that so many people now want their own space, want their independence, as you say, and that convenience factor of being able to have all of your stuff with you, especially for females, mums who might want some spare clothes for their child or some toys or, maybe some makeup or whatever the kind of things that we like to carry around with us. And also, women like to sing very badly in their own space. So I think that's an aspect as well.
And I think to add to that, what I think is really interesting in those Vox Pops is people talk about there's such a variety of the things that people are using their cars for as well. It's not just to go to work. It's actually, that first woman talks about, I don't use my car for work, actually. I'm working from home and my car is what facilitates the rest of my life. And I think what I've been seeing in my research is this growth in hybrid working and remote working and these lifestyles where you're not just at work or you're just at home, but actually you're mixing them together. You're going from leisure to work, from caring to sort of independence, in those moments. And actually a car that facilitates that is really important.
I think there's a safety element as well that we shouldn't overlook, that people, especially younger generations and females, feel safer when they've got that own vehicle. So that, if they're in a shared vehicle, they don't know who else is going to be in that car, for example. So I think there's definitely that safety element as well. It's a perspective.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Would you say that car ownership is, the culture code is a bit independence of car ownership, especially for Gen Z? I mean, you've done the research. What is coming through as a key theme?
As a key theme?
Yeah.
Well, it's searching for freedom ultimately and having a sense of independence for sure. But there's also this idea of wanting to feel like you're able to express yourself. There's this aspect of wanting to show off your style, your identity. And this is specifically for a certain subgroup of Gen Z people who are more well off. They can afford to actually express their own sort of visual codes, as it were.
And I think I'm really glad you used that, talked about that idea of freedom, because I think what I've seen in my research is that there's this narrative that still exists around cars, that sense of freedom too, the sense of being able to go and do things. But I think that particularly when thinking about women, we also have to think about a sense of freedom from, and what does it give you respite from? And there's lots of really interesting research about sort of the mental load and those kinds of endless to-do lists that women have to experience. They're 75% more likely to be taking caring responsibilities, and that, whether they have children or not, that's affected. And cars can really help facilitate that to-do list, but also they add to it as well, right? You've got to get petrol, you've got to do your car tax, you've got to make sure you're registered. And again, those responsibilities tend to fall to women. So it's how is that myth of freedom versus the reality of how they're actually living it, and how do you take that stress away? And I've got this quote that I wanted to share because for me it really encapsulates both the positives and also the way that I think we can be a bit trapped by that sort of flexibility. And this is actually from advice that someone gave about thinking about if you have a young child, pumping your breast milk whilst in your car. So I'm just going to read the quote if that's okay. So, some mums spend a lot of time driving to and from work, attending to various errands and driving their kids around. So why not use this time to take care of another necessary task on your busy schedule? It takes the pressure off rushing from place to place to make it home so that you can pump. Pumping in your car gives you the gift of time. And then she shares, one of my friends told me this useful trick did wonders for her sanity. She would drive around the block to put her colicky son to sleep and use this time to pump too. Then at the end of the drive, she'd have a sleeping baby and his next feed, so she could steal a few moments for herself. And it almost makes me sad that it's this hack, and that is a reason that people would use cars to drive around to get their baby to sleep. I did that with my friend the other day. But this idea of having to steal that time back for yourself shows how much work we still have left to do.
I think that's really interesting that people are thinking that way, although I know from working in the safety industry, when it comes to transport, that's also quite alarming that people could be so distracted by, has the pump shifted? What's my baby doing, etc. And rather than focusing on the road. But I think that's very much ingrained in me working in that industry.
No, but it's so interesting because I hadn't thought about that perspective at all. I was just in the headspace of like, should they be doing that from a, you know, hybrid working, hybrid life perspective? And then it's so easy for, you know, even me in this context to forget about the safety elements. Like, it really shows how many different things we've got to factor in when designing these kinds of cars and experiences and lifestyles.
It's that mental load as well, like you were saying, that we need to, we do the long commute and we have all of the mental, what's for tea? Is my baby okay? Have I got this? Have I got that? What do I need to do at work? And all of that mental load all of the time. And from some research that we did, we also found that a lot of women will go out of their way and make the journey longer to make it feel safer. So rather than, you know, if they rather than walk through a dark tunnel, for example, they will walk an extra 10, 15 minutes to walk in a lit area. To really kind of feel safer. And all of that adds to all of that mental load.
I love the themes that came through, especially of freedom, safety. I love the quote. But now let's hear how concerned a Gen Z and women are when it comes to green options.
Typically, if there's a normal Uber that's cheaper than a green Uber, I will go for the regular one.
I honestly don't even look. It's just whatever pops up first.
I'll be honest, I always pick the cheapest option and just paying rent and everything like that.
It would be more important on which one's cheaper, more accessible and quicker with delivery.
Actually, the green factor is very important because I feel like it's pretty much the same price. So every time it is like an option, I just go with the green one.
I don't think anybody really thinks about the green factor when, you know, wanting to get a ride home safely. I think they just want to get home safely. So I don't even know what the green factor is.
The most important thing for me would be I could afford it, the price, the color, and how big it is.
For me, purchasing a new car would boil down to miles per gallon, and honestly, that's it. Also, if it looks cute.
The most important thing will be comfort.
Maybe the look of the car, the design, and also I'd probably definitely go for a hybrid. They just feel more smoother when you're driving them and more fuel efficient.
It's more important for me to get eco-friendly and just green, very comforting, and a small car.
I do a lot of towing, so for me it has to be quite a large car, but I also like the interior to be quite luxurious.
If I'm getting my own car, my number one priority would be safety, and right after safety would be how affordable it is to drive.
I would prefer to have a hybrid because I am apprehensive about committing to only being electric because of the accessibility of charging stations.
I wouldn't necessarily prefer a hybrid over a fully electric car, but the ones I have seen are quite small and I don't really like the design.
I would probably prefer a hybrid car. I don't know how electric cars really work, but my main factor would be if there's like a power outage. Would you still charge your car?
Hybrid cars have the possibility to load the electricity in the city, but if you're going for longer trips, it's like so much easier if you have like gas and can go for longer trips.
I think that I would have a little more peace of mind with a hybrid and a gas option.
I'd probably go for the EV just because I could get the setup at home, I could charge it, perhaps save some money, and perhaps it would be better for the environment as well.
So this video really brings us to the heart of our conversation today, the green option, the Gen Z and women's understanding of green options, the whole ethical consumerism. And to me, it sounded like it is not so much an or question, but a more and question. They do want safety. Affordability is big on the list. I love that they still want cute cars, but their understanding, especially when it comes to hybrid cars. And also, I do want to talk more about the preference of hybrid versus EV. Very keen to get your views on it.
So when we conduct our research, we are able to pull out our Accelerate model, which is effectively a mapping of the human needs, the core sort of feelings and values which reflect the type of conversation that's coming out from the data set. And we saw that the three core drivers were control, simplicity, and achievement. And this is reflecting the sort of key desires for Gen Z when it comes to hybrids in general. Control being a space to navigate change and uncertainty, simplicity, trying to find simple, authentic solutions to achieve this, and achievement is, of course, reaching your goals and finding a solution to these problems. So hybrids in this space are effectively seen as the perfect solution for navigating that change and sense of instability. I do think cost is a primary factor, but the fact is they do ideally want to have these greener technologies. It's just the affordability is not quite there at the moment.
I think it's always not that obvious as well when you look at ride sharing and people, on the video they were talking about not taking that option. It's not always that clear what that option is, or if it is more expensive. Like you say, cost is such a major factor that it's one of those things that's so personal that depending on what situation you're in, what age you are, for example, that's going to be an important thing to consider. So they're always going to go for that cheaper option. So I think more of the question is, what can we do to incentivize that generation to be able to afford it, so that it is always the go-to option rather than, I can't really afford that because I've got to pay my rent. So, we need to be doing more to make that accessible.
And I think, accessibility is such an important point because, in those Vox Pops, the two compromises that came up were affordability and safety. And I know we've talked about that a bit more. And I think hybrids are a really interesting proposition in that space. So in my research, I found that people were talking about, there were massive concerns about safety. If someone was thinking about going fully electric, for example, then there were concerns around the safety of charging stations and are the charging stations in isolated points? What if you have to access them late at night and you're on your own? What if you have to wait for a really long time? That's a source of anxiety. Range anxiety is an issue, but doubly if you have kids in the car, there's a sense of, the safety, your personal safety that the car facilitates, and then also, are you safe using the car? But then other women talk about not feeling safe in fuel stations and those themselves being quite unsafe environments. So, the hybrid cars actually give you that option, give you that flexibility. Here's a charging station in daylight, I can do that. Or I can charge at home at night, or I can go to a fuel station at this point. I don't have to choose. And I think that theme of not having to choose, but being able to find something that works for you also talks about what you're saying with affordability, also talks about environmentalism. It's not having to compromise on any of these values, but finding something that brings them all together.
I think sometimes though, with the planning, with transport planning and infrastructure planning, some of these could be eliminated. Instead of having, for example, charging points, which are always at the back in the dark corner of a car park in a poorly lit area, and bike sheds as well are often the same. Why do we do that? Why not put them front and center so they're in a more visible area to make people feel safer? And then they're more likely to be able to have an electric vehicle because they'll feel safer charging it rather than I've got to go to a dark corner, because that's that perception thing again.
Really good point.
Yeah, it's a real challenge.
And I would love to know, whose needs are being prioritised in the urban planning when they decide where to put the charging points in the first place. Like we know from, Caroline Criado-Paris writes in Invisible Women how when planning public transport networks, in many cities they were prioritised to facilitate commuting and a sort of into and out of the centre of town type thing. But for women who are trip chaining around suburbs, actually you have to use a car because you can't get the public transport around that. And that happens in this kind of structural urban design among so many different centres. So again, whose needs are being considered when they go, this is where we put the charging points, and how does that make a difference?
And there's also this behavioural aspect that we need to consider when it comes to thinking about how we shift this mindset, because people aren't used to this concept of having to plan ahead and think about the future and how they're going to navigate their week in advance when it comes to their travels. They just want to get up and go and be done with it. So a lot of the conversation coming around for Gen Z specifically was the fact that they didn't want to have to, be stuck on the A20 and have to walk down the road and get a bucket of electricity to like refuel their car. There's a lot of anxiety when it comes to actually thinking about how you can use this form of transport, even though it's going to be better for the environment.
That's very interesting. I do want to stay on the topic of Gen Z here. And one of the things in the video, provocative question, but in your view, do you think Gen Z understands the green option? What is green for them, the ethical consumerism? I loved how you said what they can control and the research that you did, but I want to get your views on Gen Z and how do they understand green as an option, and where does hybrid sit in all that? That is on demand, but is also is a greener option. What do they understand with, and I'm using the word green a little bit more, loosely here.
I think it would be unfair to say that all Gen Z are the same when it comes to their opinions on the environmental impacts. I think some are definitely more educated than others when it comes to what's right for the environment, and how an electric vehicle works, how a hybrid works, and what some of the other options are. I think there's a difference in understanding, and as we've seen from some of the very young generations, they are very much active in that green space, and they're the next generation that are going to come up. So it's going to be interesting to see whether in the future they always go for that green option, even if it's more expensive. They'll sacrifice, their take-out coffee, for example, so that they can pay for that green vehicle. I wonder if that will change in the future.
I think it's so hard because there's the individual responsibility and then there's the structural change, right? And I think that the thing about Gen Z is that the one thing they do all have in common is that they're the same age. There's the amount of money that you have when you're that young and the choices that you're able to make versus as you grow older, as you have more purchasing power, as you're able to start making those choices that live your values, are they able to sort of keep doing that? But at the same time, what are the options that are available to them? Is if we create a society where the options are hybrid or electric, which will you choose as opposed to hybrid, electric or petrol, then how can they make those different valuations? I think it's so much to ask any one individual to save the planet. And I think that's why so many people have so much guilt and eco-anxiety and are constantly trying to trade off, how do I weigh up paying my rent with my personal safety, with the environment? That's an impossible thing for an individual to choose. So actually it's how do people who are affecting bigger contexts or sort of, doing urban planning in a city or providing options that make those choices easier rather than sort of going, well, if individuals wanted it, they'd go and do it, because it's never that simple.
Yeah, I think what you touched on there about the future of having just hybrid or just electric is the kind of idealistic world that a lot of Gen Zs would have. They would like that to be the opportunities in front of them. But as it currently stands, there are still a lot of Gen Zs who still talk about the kind of romantic aspects of driving a car, whether it's the rumbling of the engine or the kind of feeling of the clutch and the gear stick. And, there's all these things that are kind of lost in this new futuristic world. But I do think it would be, for the majority, a preference to have a full greener world.
It's not always the option though, is it? I mean, I certainly, like the lady in the video, I also tow a caravan, so an electric vehicle is not an option as much as I would like it to be. So we did look into that option, but it's just not feasible at the moment. But as technology improves and innovation gets there, then in the future, hopefully it will be an option.
Brilliant conversation. My favorite line is, hybrid is just an EV with a backup. With that line, let's move on to my favorite topic, women. Let's see, we asked women, how do manufacturers address the needs of women? And let's see our next film.
What priorities? Safety.
When it comes to women, vehicle manufacturers will make it about women and their children and whether a car will accommodate like having a family. That's the only time that I think that they talk about women.
I'm not really seeing any car manufacturing focusing on women.
Probably the interior design of a car and the display. So things like Apple CarPlay.
I'm not sure, to be honest. Maybe like a little makeup mirror. I have no idea, to be honest, what you mean.
I would say I would have never noticed any priorities for a woman. I think it's built for the general public.
I love this one. I think this provoked the max confusion. Clearly, people don't know if and what car manufacturers are doing for women consumers. My favorite line is, most of the things in automotive industry are designed by the men, for the men, of the men. But very keen to have your thoughts on this. Who wants to start first?
I can add a few facts, actually. So it has changed somewhat. So certainly I was in the motor industry and the design industry in the 90s and noughties, and everything was designed to a 95 percentile male mannequin. And that was always the way it was. Whereas things now are changing. They're using the 5th percentile female mannequin. So that represents a much shorter, more petite person, not necessarily female, so that they can really understand that size of person when it comes to crash testing, etc. So that is really changing with regards to not the makeup mirrors and things like that, but the ingress, egress, so getting in and out of the vehicles, also the seatbelt placement. And there's also some work that certainly we're doing with the UN around that. And there is work out there which is very much about looking at seatbelts for women and seatbelts for pregnant women as well, which are safer. So there's changes. It's slow, but there are some changes happening.
And I think, so I do a lot of work on gender data gaps, and I think what I find is that there's the gaps where it's like, we've not done the research, we've not done the design, we're not making things for women yet. But then there's also the gap that's like, we are making things, we are making progress, there is research or development being done, but no one knows about it, and no one's being told about it, and the knowledge isn't being shared equally. And that's what I find really interesting about those videos, is that lack of knowledge about even the things that do exist. And something that I found when I was doing my research was that when it comes to buying a car, a significant number of women still really rely on recommendations from friends and family in order to decide what to get next. And there's a few different sort of theories and things that we can see from that. And one of them is that women are much, much less likely than men to see car content not in a car-specific space. So men can kind of read a general men's magazine or watch TV or something, and there'll be car adverts. But if a woman wants to research a new car, she has to go to a car-specific space to find things that will tell her the information that she needs, which means that she's automatically going into a space that's very male-coded and doesn't feel like it's for her. And in those environments where women don't feel heard, they don't feel trusted, they don't feel listened to, we see that they are then much more likely to go to these sort of trusted friends and family networks. It's the same thing that happens in healthcare. It's the same thing that happens in gaming. This is where they get the recommendations from, because they don't see themselves and their questions being answered in the spaces that they go into, and it's not coming to them into their spaces. So they have to go through these informal, almost whisper networks to find out what they need to go. So it's, how do we make it better, but also how do we make what exists accessible to what's there already?
I've also seen the same, that a lot of Gen Z specifically are looking for advice from family members, friends, and so on. They don't actually know what is available to them on the market. And safety being a sort of key concern, a key focus. A few women have mentioned that on the Vox Pops there. But it does seem that when it comes to design for women specifically, that's not really known. And when I was doing looking through TikTok and looking through social media, it seems like the bulk of the conversation when it comes to a women's car was about the aesthetic and the design choices, and making it feel like it's personalized to them, and making sure it matches their outfit and so on, things like that, which is also, of course, very gendered and not fully representative. So it shows that social media is also creating that bias and representation of the values of young Gen Z women as well.
And I was reading something that was saying, women are much more interested in the style of the car and the aesthetic, as you say, but also, you know, how it makes them feel. Whereas, exactly. And then it was like, but you know, men are more interested in like the power and the performance and the stats and things like that. And I would argue, well, that's also about how it makes them feel, because most of the people who are buying cars are not engineers. It's just one of them we code as emotional and one of them we code as practical. But for everyone, like, unless you're literally an expert in mechanical design, you're going on instinct. It's actually about how you make them feel. It's actually an emotional choice, but is it coded as rational or is it coded as emotional?
Mm-hmm. And I think there's so many derogatory things as well that you see on social media. One I saw recently was about the WPS in vehicles, the women's parking sensor, specifically for women who cannot park. I mean, it's those kind of things that we see over and over. I mean, I'd love to tell people, I used to be a high-speed test driver. I was, when I was in my previous industry, you know, trashing a car around, trying to break it. I know how to park a car. So those kind of, it's that also that side of things, which is quite insulting, actually.
And I think just to add to that as well, one of the things I found really interesting in my research was, you know, again, thinking about like electric vehicles or sort of being at the forefront of new car technologies. There was research showing that quite a lot of women who don't want to be seen as a pioneer, they don't want to stand out and sort of like show themselves as like, look, I've got the newest car, like I know about this, because it exposes you to this observation and the potential ridicule or the potential judgment or those jokes and things like that. And it's actually, you know, it could potentially be dangerous to sort of, if you're not very confident in your knowledge or you haven't sort of learnt that, show yourself up in that way. And again, the same thing happens in gaming, and there's statistics that show that women who game, quite a lot of them don't want to identify themselves as women gamers because it potentially exposes them to, well, who do you think you are in this traditionally male sector? And then that means that, you know, women aren't seeing, I don't know if role models are the right word, but just, you know, other people doing the same things that then shows them, well, this is what I could do, which then leads to that thing about knowledge and exposure and countering the stereotypes, I guess, because there's nothing to fill that vacuum. So I think it's really interesting looking at the patterns of different traditionally male-dominated spaces versus the reality of actually, like, women drive cars, women play games, like none of this is new information, but what we see and what we experience can be really different.
That was fabulous. Now to our final section, the future.
If public transport was free and easy to use and more accessible, I probably still would use a car. I like my own space.
If public transit was free and easy to use, I would still want to own a car to go farther than just within the city limits.
I probably wouldn't own a car if the public transport was free.
If public transport was very good, I would maybe just have like a really inexpensive, maybe like used car.
I have kids and they have to be at different places at different times or within a certain time frame, so I don't think the transportation would be convenient in my life.
I'm probably always going to own a car in the future, just because, you know, independence-wise, I don't want to have to wait for somebody to take me places.
In an ideal situation, public transit would get me everywhere that I want to go, and I would not have a car at all.
My opinion on driverless cars is that it's kind of scary.
I believe they're not safe.
I feel a little bit more trusting when there's a human there controlling the car.
Probably not a massive fan of them, just in case technology doesn't work.
We're not there yet, but it's like the future, like for sure. Like there will be a place for it, I think.
It would take away people risking lives of people on the road or their own life, like, yeah. And it would negate anyone needing to really own a car as well. If you just call a car that drives itself to you, I mean, that just changes the game.
I've never been in one. I would like to experience it, but then again, it also feels also kind of dangerous because you don't know what's driving, who's driving, how do you trust that kind of technology?
Now that was interesting. So let's talk about what is important for the future of mobility for this generation. Some very exciting views and provocative views there. I know you are eager to go on this.
So obviously I work in the automated transport industry and see how much safer we hope things will be. And certainly listening to some of those comments, it makes me realise how much work we need to do with regards to public perception and that education piece and helping people understand the possibilities of an automated vehicle, especially with an ageing population, to enable people to travel around independently later on in life, as well as the younger generation. I think there's so much scope, but the fact that they are unaware of it, and we've touched on it earlier on, that people don't necessarily understand, it just shows that the education piece, we've got a long way to go, for sure.
I think there's a lot of fascination with the new technology that's emerging for Gen Z specifically, and people are wanting to grasp it, but it is being viewed from a distance. It's being viewed from afar because they don't feel like it's quite tangible to them yet. It's also, the cost factor being in the way. It doesn't feel like a reality that's within their own kind of present grasp as it currently stands. And there's also, we were also seeing this emergence of people who are interested in car collectibles as well, which kind of goes against this whole idea of wanting to move forward and into the future. People are also reflecting in the past and being really interested in past trends and things that are sort of culturally valuable from the 90s. So this really sort of rejects this idea of going into the future. So there's a bit of a disparity there from people wanting to move forward, but then also people really valuing objects with heritage and thinking about where they've come from and having this value in nurturing and protecting what we already have, rather than constantly wanting to produce more and create more fuel and rubbish in the world, effectively.
And I think it's so interesting in those Vox Pops, the way that, and I do wonder if some of this is a little bit market coded, but the real struggle to imagine a public transport network by most of the people that we spoke to that would be able to get them anywhere that they'd want to go. And they choose to put these limits onto what they think it could be and sort of all go, well, it would be free, but it wouldn't be good enough and I'd still need a car. But then in the second section, one of the respondents was talking about essentially driverless cars as a public transport network, right? And facilitating that complete freedom and flexibility. So it's almost like if you combine those two things together, you get a vision of the future that's really new, but you have to overcome the sort of the fears and the concerns and the limits in those ways. So I just thought that was interesting.
I think in reality though, your idea of going back to the past and we want to hold on to some of those things, there's not going to be a date where, right, that's it, everything's autonomous from this date. In our lifetime, it's probably always going to be the hybrid of both types of human-driven and automated vehicles. So we're going to have to sort of understand how to work around that different state of transport. But if you think about an interesting analogy that was told to me when I was a bit kind of skeptical, if you like, is the elevator. So years ago, certainly when I was a child, I think I'm the oldest one here, but certainly when I was a child, you would get into an elevator and somebody else would press the button to take you to the floor you wanted to go to. And you would trust that person to drive that metal box for you up to the 85th floor. Whereas these days, you get into an elevator on your own or with a bunch of random people you don't know, and you press the button and that metal box takes you where you need to go and you trust it. And again, there wasn't a date where you say, right, from now on, I'm going to trust that metal box. It was a gradual shift, but it just, helps you understand that perception that eventually they will become normal and less scary and not the end of the world.
I love that example. Can I bring this thought back to the room that cars are not getting out of fashion anytime soon, especially with the hybrid and EV technology coming through? Pretty much every participant in that video and interview said they do want to keep the car and have the car, and they do see a role of a vehicle in their life going forward. So cars are not getting out of fashion anytime soon. Just want to get your thoughts on it. I mean, you are Gen Z yourself. So what is your view on it? Let's start with you.
Well, I would completely agree with that statement. I mean, I actually just did a road trip just now around Morocco. So I'm very I guess I'm part of that sort of section of people that are interested in having that need for sort of freedom, spontaneity, independence, and so on. You know, as someone who lives in an urban city, I would prefer to have free public transport. That is something that would feel like a godsend, you know. But it's more about that keenness for adventure and you know, exploring things and discovering things, which is where I think the car feels really vital for the younger demographic, because that's something that you can't really achieve through public transport. It doesn't give you the same sort of emotional hit that you would achieve when you're kind of sitting behind the wheel and you're the one directing your route, you know. I think that kind of feeling is quite irreplaceable.
I also think, though, that there is the element of that independence, not necessarily being able to drive. So who's to say that in the future you won't own your own automated vehicle? So it sits on your drive, you ask it to take you where you need to go, when you need to go. So you've still got that convenience and that sense of adventure. You know, take me to Morocco today. I'm not sure you can do that, but take me wherever I want to go today in this automated vehicle. So you've still got that element of independence, you've still got that element of choice, but it's automated. So there's more of the safety factors and the other benefits that go alongside autonomous transport.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and I think for me it's not about whether cars are going out of fashion or is it public transport or is it not. I mean, I'm not a great driver. If anyone saw the car I have, I think I'd be disqualified from this panel. It's like it's such a bucket. But I think it's more thinking about how do those design principles, as we start to build the cars of the future, reflect the needs of a much broader range of people than they currently have, and sort of thinking about not just accessible design that encompasses, or inclusive design that encompasses a broader range of people, like with the crash test dummy, but universal design that sort of starts from the principle of we want everyone to be able to access this. Let's think about the broadest needs as possible and co-create with the type of people that are using, rather than building something in a lab and throwing it out into the world and seeing sort of what happens with that.
I think it's really interesting what you were saying about accessibility, because one of the potential advantages for automated transport is more accessible transport for more people. So people who can't currently travel on their own independently, they will have that potential option. So more people will be able to have cars, yes, but there are people who might not have been able to have cars currently. One of the advantages of the automated transport industry being such a new industry is that we are already considering accessibility for vulnerable users and women right from the start of that innovation, rather than it having to be a bolt-on with, you know, legacy transport such as rail and some of the other modes of transport. So we are considering those aspects right from the beginning, which I think is revolutionary, but also fantastic to see.
I do want to have one last thought from all of you on Gen Z and women. Very quick fireside. Last quick words on this one.
Well, Gen Z perspective, ultimately they're freedom finders, they're idealists, they're looking into the kind of future prospect of what is an opportunity to, you know, have change and positive shifts in our sort of everyday to day lifestyles.
I would say we've got a lot of work to do, but the more panels like this, the more women there are in the industry who are actually speaking out and not shying away to really push the point, the better we'll be. The more research we can do, and the more innovation will help this specific issue. If nobody is having this conversation in 10, 15 years' time, then we've done the right thing.
And I think for me, it's about, you know, when you come across those blocks and those barriers and the things that are making it less accessible for women, or thinking about the ways that they might do something differently, stepping back from just the car context and going, what might this be about? What might be causing this behaviour? And what can we learn from other sectors and other places to bring that back to it, rather than just looking at it in a silo, and that can find new ways to start solving the recurring problems.
One last question. Next car, EV or hybrid?
Oh, hybrid.
Next car, EV or hybrid?
EV if it can tow a caravan, because I'm not prepared to give that up.
Hybrid.
For me, it's hybrid. All right, thank you so much. That was such an interesting discussion. Thank you for the provocative thoughts and provocative statements. And I think I love what you said. In next 15 years, if we're not sitting here having this discussion, we've done something right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.